Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 300 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack for Business truly is? Your hosts are Bernie Franzgrote from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You, Inc.
Today's topic is change one federal policy and watch Canadian tech startups rocket. Now, from the audience perspective, why can't Canadian tech startups get the same investment support as mining did for 71 years? And that's what our guest today, David, is here to talk about. He's leading the charge to change a single federal policy, Canadian federal policy, that is, that could unlock billions in private capital and fuel a new era of Canadian innovation by expanding the flow-through shares beyond mining and into the tech sector. David believes that we can help startups grow, create high-paying jobs, and reduce our reliance on foreign investment and or government bailouts. This episode is a must-listen to if you're a founder, investor, policymaker, or just someone who believes Canada can do better for its entrepreneurs. Our guest today is David Perry from CanFlowThrough.com. David is a seasoned businessman based in Gatineau, Quebec, across the river from Ottawa. He has authored 6 books about how to find a job and staffing issues for companies. The Wall Street Journal named him the guerrilla marketer for his innovative ideas on how to find a job. For 40 years, David has been a recruiter of talent, especially for the tech industry and at the C-class level. He has placed over 1,000 plus executives on 5 continents. His company, Perry Martel International, was co-founded with his wife, Anita Martel. And David is also regularly advises companies on staffing issues and has been deeply involved in working to improve Canada's tech sector. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here, sir. And what's your favorite quarter saying, sir?
I'm just excited to be here. We're pinching ourselves over a Canflow Through because we've actually managed to get what we wanted done in a relatively short amount of time. The first step, at least anyway. My favorite quote, and I'm going to give you context afterwards. My favorite quote is from my stepmother. Okay. And the things she used to say all the time is it's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. Okay. Here's the context. She's legally blind, my stepmother. Married my father in 75 or 76. After she got out of the convent, I'll give you the backstory. My mother, at the age of 12, was a guest pianist at the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. Driving home, they got hit by a drunk driver. She went through the windshield. They picked her up. They put a compress on. Woman went blind. What do you do with a blind 12-year-old kid as you're walking into World War II? You put her in a convent. And she stayed in that convent from 1936, I think, until I can't even remember. Long time, 35 plus years, blind. And then Kim Campbell and her sister were both students of my mother, this blind nun, who was like 5'9" in heels, okay? And then she got some of her vision back. I think she said she left the convent. I think they threw her out, but that's another story. But here's this blind woman, and she lived by that. She lived by it, and she used to say, don't ask what you can do, just do it. And every year, she would take her salary, where she was the principal of a language school in Saint Jean. She would take her salary, and she would buy Christmas gifts or presents for people in other neighborhoods. Nobody ever knew. She would just have it dropped off. She would pay people's mortgages or pay their rent. Nobody ever knew. She just didn't care. And I think that is probably more than anything else what drove me to help do this. But it also drives people like Paul Labarge. You guys heard of the Canada Trail? Do you know who did it? Paul Labarge conceived of it, raised the money, built the board, backed away. And Paul Brett, another guy, he sees stuff that needs to get done. He just steps in, helps out, gets it done. As I said, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And I think a lot of Canadians actually live that by their core. And my American friends make fun of us because we're not as braggadocious. I appreciate it more, me personally. So I appreciated you asking me what my favorite quote was, because it comes from my blind ex-nun stepmother.
So what was your first reaction to hear that there's a political party that's actually paying attention to this idea of changing the tax landscape to help promote tech?
What I think,
Yeah,
honestly, I
yeah.
thought, look out world, here we come. I've been a recruiter now for 40 years, and we recruit all over the world. I've been recruiting in tech since the mid-90s. I was part of the Canadian Advanced Technology Alliance. And so I've seen the brilliant, and I actually sat on the board of the Software Human Resources Council for 5 years and chaired the Canadian Technology Human Resources Board. Why is this relevant? It's relevant because I've seen the brilliance of Canadian engineering around tech. I've also seen the absolute frustration of having to go to the South, into the States to get money. And for me, this has always been a burning issue because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I still remember getting teased about this. This is absolute crazy. Remember the Avro Arrow? Either one of you old enough to remember the Avro Arrow?
Oh, yes.
The
Oh, yeah.
fastest plane in the world. Fastest plane in the world. And what did we do? We cut it up and we dropped it in the Great Lakes. It's always been a bugaboo. When I was down in the States from the late 60s, early 70s, I used to get teased in school about how great America was. And I remember telling my dad this one night, and he said, son, remember, when they closed the Avro Arrow, all those engineers, you know where they went, right? I said, no, Dad, I have no clue. I was 8 years old. And he said, they went to NASA. Those are the guys that lift off the spaceships. They went to NASA, and then they went to Lockheed, and they went to Boeing. So the planes you're flying were designed and built by Canadians, by and large. And it wasn't the Americans that put a man on the moon, technically. It was Canadians. They were in the room when it took off. They were in the room when it came back. And what most people, this is my dad, and what most people don't realize is that Canada was on the moon first. Because the feet that landed on the lunar lander, they were built in Canada. So technically, we were there first. But I digress. I don't tell that story very often. And I did check it out because my dad was a bit of a wonk. We were the only Canadians on this Air Force base for like decades. Trust but verify. I learned that with my dad a long time ago. Trust but verify.
What?
I actually know what a flow-through share is, but I don't know that our audience does. Why don't you tell us?
Well, that's a great question. A flow-through share is a tax-enhanced share of a company. It allows an individual, right now only in mining and oil and gas, but it allows an individual to buy a share in a company and de-risk that purchase. So by de-risk, what I mean is they buy the share. Let's say they buy $100,000 worth of shares. That takes down their taxable income by $100,000. And at the end of the day, they end up getting some of the money back. Could be a 50% or more. And what happens is that money now goes to the mining company or the exploration company, and they can go out and do, what we in tech would call R&D. They'll go out and develop a mine, dig some holes, look for oil and gold with money that they have gotten from another individual. Okay, so they don't have to stand around and wait around for all this kind of stuff. And and what they call it a flow through is they take some of their expenses and they flow those expenses through to the person who bought the shares, and that's what lowers the risk and lowers the individual's taxable income. And if everything works out well, and mining is number one, Canadian mining is number one in the world. When they hit gold or strike oil, and the company's shares increase, if they sell them, flow through shares, they have to report capital gains. So while the government may, in the short term, lose that taxable revenue, they more than make up for it on the back end when they're sold and while it's happening, because you pass through $100,000, flow through shares, and all of a sudden the oil company, the mining company's got to go out, got to hire people, buy equipment. It's a money multiplier of 2.5 to 3 times. So mining will do $1 billion a year in flow through shares, and it'll have add-on value to the community because it's going to bring in another $2.5 to $3 billion in investment. So Canada just wins. But the interesting thing for me is that it takes 10 plus years to build a mine. It doesn't take even 10 months to bring a new software product to market. So theoretically, if you're invested in tech, you could see those returns both to the individual, the company, and the taxpayers much, much faster. So is that a good explanation, Wayne?
I thought so.
Okay. You said you knew, so I don't know.
I have only a facile understanding. I am no
Okay.
expert.
Okay. Neither
So
am I.
it sounds like there's a life cycle to this. So from the oil and exploration, the mining exploration sector, it's like you just said, 5, 10 years before everything's realized, right? If you're digging into the earth, what is the typical life cycle in the tech universe? When do you start seeing benefit to the businesses seeking the funds, to the investor, and back to the country itself? Is it like within, assuming tech is now, you said 10 months, is it like within a year and a half, there's a rebound effect where that multiplier kicks in?
Nobody knows, but it's reasonable to assume. I've been in tech now for 30 years. I know that you can have a bright idea on Monday and you can have an MVP, a most valuable product or most sustainable product, by Friday. And you can be out selling because tech really, especially software side with IP, is frictionless. You don't have to drag the drilling equipment out to do it. You're just like, okay, guys, we got to go. Look at Shopify. What we need to do, and Shopify got no government support. Lots of government stepped in after the fact and took credit for what Shopify did. Why not another 10, 20, 30, 50 Shopifys? And what's interesting, most people don't know this, is that the mining industry itself is a huge user of technology. They use, what are they called? Vehicles that don't need people in them, right? And they use predictive analytics for ore body modeling. They use AI for surveying, and they use drones to go out and survey as well. So the mining industry, I just wrote an article on this. It came out yesterday for Canadian Mining Magazine. The mining industry has been using tech for decades. So tech standing on mining shoulders to do FTS is just the next evolution as far as I can see it. So I think this is an economic marriage to be made. And I think it'll be beneficial to both.
Does anybody else do this in the world? Or is this unique to us? Or
Great question. You mean FTS?
yeah,
Yeah. So on the mining side,
even FTS for tech.
so yes and yes. Canada may have invented FTS, but the Americans use it in mining. The Aussies use it. The Brits use it. I don't know what mining they do, because anyway, but Brits and Aussies have both taken the concept of FTS and they've changed it slightly, reworded it, and their industries, like the Aussie, and I was reading the notes last night. The Australia does, I think it's 175 billion in GDP for tech. And that's because of this, the way they allow companies to use this FTS-like vehicle. And the Brits are more than that. It's typical, right? I wrote this article a couple weeks ago about Superman. You guys knew Superman's Canadian, right? Okay, so Superman's Canadian, and typical Canadian, in typical Canadian style, the guys that wrote it sold it to DC Comics for $130. Come on, that's criminal. DC's made billions off it. But there again, that just mirrors what we're talking about in tech. The brilliance of the engineering that's coming out of Canada is globally known. It's just a fact. And we continue to do this year after year. Canadian GDP from hard tech is 125 billion a year. If you use the ICTC numbers, Information Communications Technology Organization, all of tech, including clean tech and other things, it's $180 billion. How many people will work in tech in Canada? Show of hands, anybody? Automotive, it's 400,000. Mining, it's 700 plus thousand. Tech, it's 1.8 million. 1.8 million. And it's the quietest industry. Oh, come on, it's 3 times the size of mining. It's 5 times the size of automotive. And it's quiet. They just do their stuff because there is no national body that represents tech or knowledge workers in this country. So I think that's why FTS has taken so long to make this switch over into the technology. And we're not there yet, but into the technology industry, because there just hasn't been the advocacy that automotive has and mining has. We changed this with this change in tax law. And what happens all of a sudden is we're keeping Canadians here. So they're graduating from Carleton or U of O or wherever across the country, and they stay here instead of going to Seattle or Texas, California. So we get to keep our people here. We get to keep the jobs here. Keeping the jobs here, especially if they come with Canadian companies, because most of the tech companies in Canada are U.S. branch plants. Don't get me started, but okay. So if we keep the people here, we keep the IP here, we're going to keep the money here. And keeping the money here, it's a virtuous updraft, right? Because all of a sudden, that spawns new companies. It spawns new wealth, which spawns more taxes for the government, which makes social services for everybody a whole lot easier. This is something that should have been done a while ago, quite a while ago. And we just have Mr. Trump to thank for galvanizing Canadians around, hey, we are special. Let's do something about it. So we're hoping that this is going to continue.
Two things. It almost tells me about Nortel, because when Nortel crashed and burned, all of a sudden you see all these startups and you're going, where you come from? Well, Nortel, right? And so I could see that. Mice, though, is there a governing body? Not even governing. Is there a body where it represents the tech, or is it too siloed? I deal with autonomous vehicles. I deal with AI. I deal with firmware, hardware. Is there some sort of associations that where people go, hey, or are you just saying, is there a ripe opportunity to develop an association that will help promote the living heck out of our tech?
So yes, no, yes, and yes. So here, sorry, I was actually tracking. There is no national association. There used to be one called the Canadian Advanced Technology Alliance. And actually, that's why we're really here today. John Reed, who was the CEO, president of CATA for a long time, brought me into CATA back in 93. We were down at his retreat in Arizona 6 years ago. And we had a discussion about what we were going to do, because we're both getting retirement age. What we're going to do when we got back, and we decided we're going to do two things. We were going to push FTS forward, because he used to be with the Canadian Mining Association, right? He was a miner. So he didn't get it either. And then we were going to build a national body for knowledge workers. So unfortunately, we came back from the cottage, or from his vacation place 2 weeks later, and had the CATA conference, and John passed away about 2 weeks after that. But coming out of Arizona, we both agreed we were going to get FTS on the books, and we were going to build a national presence the way it needed to be done, because it hadn't been done yet. So this is the first of it. And what happened here was when the Trudeau government decided they were going to redo capital gains, and literally, pardon my language, screw over everything I've done for the last 30 years to make my retirement okay, I said, enough. So I called Paul Labarge Weinstein, who was one of John's best friends, and took him for breakfast. And he beat me by the head and shoulders for about 3 hours over breakfast to make sure that I was doing this just for the right reasons, because that's what Paul's all about. And so we decided to push forward. And then I reached out to Paul Brent, because Paul was also a friend of John Reed's, and I really needed help getting this lifted. I can have the ideas. I don't have the mouthpiece to do what Paul Brent does, which is bring it in. So that's how all of this stuff really started again in December. So I sat down, wrote a nice letter to Mr. Trudeau, sent it to him the first week in December. He obviously didn't read it, because things went sideways real fast. And then I took that letter, it's on the website. And I took that letter and I sent it to all of the parliamentary members of the committee, the House Committee on Finance, and said, here's the letter I just sent Mr. Trudeau. Y'all should take a look at this. And then when the election got called, I sent it to all of the party leaders and said, you should take a look at this. And phone calls, emails, and no, everybody just left us alone until last week, when the Liberals said, this makes a lot of sense, but Carney's a different cat. He's not political, not a politician. He's a business guy. So this is finance. This is high-end finance. And he understands, or I assume, the chain reaction when you start something like this, and how that supply chain, the supply chain of money works, which is why I believe they decided to jump on this. Ironically, it was Aaron O'Toole who actually put it in his platform first when he ran in the last elections. That's how the Conservatives part of this as well. Sorry, did that answer your question? Maybe.
You actually answered a whole bunch of future questions too.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, we're done.
Yeah,
Good.
no,
Wow. Exhale briefly. I think this is a tremendously clever long-term solution that I think is going to hit jealousy and populism because people will see it as a tax break for the wealthy. And so when good common sense won't be allowed to develop. Is that a fear of yours as well?
You've been reading through my FAQs on the website, so I actually spilled that out. And yes, it's a concern. And here's what we've done about it. Okay. FTS is not for the wealthy, unless you're a sardonic, small-minded individual who only looks at the negative side of it, right? Because if it happens to be for the wealthy, who cares? First, stick with me here. Who cares? If a wealthy person puts their money into a tech startup or a mine, I don't care, it generates income. We're predicting, because we used the models that the government has developed over the years, we're predicting $500 million the first year. The $500 million is private investment that goes into these things, and that $500 million becomes $1 billion in a quarter when you do the multiplier with all the people that get hired. And then miraculously, there's this 30% tax that we're all going to pay no matter what. And on $1 billion in a quarter, that's $375 million. That will fund a lot of social services. So yes, FTX for wealthy people isn't sexy. However, if you market it backwards and understand that FTS brings job creation, creates IP, creates wealth for Canadians, it allows ordinary Canadians to invest in Canada. And all of a sudden, you're keeping the IP here, you're keeping the Canadians here. I said, yes, it's a virtuous updraft. So that's the sexy part. Sorry, Wayne, I didn't mean to steal all your thunder there, but that's how I view this stuff.
You didn't steal any. You just answered my question.
Okay, sorry.
in the past, governments to help foster growth in any sector are usually it's bailouts. But in other countries, they made a massive mistake, and then the large corporations get the funds from the government. And here in Canada, you'll see grants coming out, not so much for bailouts, it's just to help stimulate a certain activity. Why is this better than grants?
A great question. 2 reasons. 1, the government doesn't have to get involved. So the administrative savings are going to be substantial, okay? And 2, when the government gets involved in picking the winners, I've only been at this for 40 years, but they don't do a good job. We can start with the Avro Aero. We can talk about the bailout of automotive versus Nortel. Give me a break. I won't even start there. BlackBerry, MDA. There's a whole host of them where the government has bet wrong because they bet safe. So rather than put that onus on the government to stand in Parliament and explain why something else screwed up, let the average Canadian take their money and invest it where they think will do well. So that's the answer to that question.
Does this mean that we could be less reliant on U.S. capital?
Oh, God, I hope so. So, yes. I mean, right now, 75% of the money that comes into the country for tech comes from the States. And the problem with that is twofold. As an insider, I have seen many VCs in the States, a couple in Canada too, but VCs in the States spread their money around 5 or 6 companies. And as they do, and all of a sudden, 1 or 2 are doing really well. And they take the other 3 and they fold them in. And there goes the company. There goes the IP. It all goes to the other companies. Most of them typically are American. And again, if it's a U.S. firm that's putting in the money, profits are going back to the States, not Canada. And the IP goes back to the States, not Canada. Once again, we're hewers of water and drawers of wood, we're using our natural resources all over again. This time it just happens to be the brain power of Canadians. And if we've learned nothing else, we've learned that my kids, when they were young, would say, Dad, why does the oil from Alberta get pumped across the border so the Americans can refine it and sell it back to us? And I said, I'd like to take you down to Parliament Hill and let you ask that question. At 7 years old, okay, doesn't make sense. So we're doing the same thing right now with our brain power. When Microsoft started, Bill Gates couldn't really afford a lot of high-powered engineers. So he hired a bunch of kids from Waterloo. These guys got jobs, right? And so next year, they're going to hire more people. It's the guys from Waterloo are going, Susie and Bob and Jane, I know them. They're graduating now. Oh. So the brain drain, that's how it started. And I sat on the board of directors of the Software Human Resources Council, now ICTC, and their strategy, engineers, not the actual strategy of the executive director, was, well, let the Canadians go south, and then they'll bring back all their knowledge and build companies in Canada. Ain't wrong. No, that guy met a gal, they're married, they got a house, 2 cars. No, they're not coming back. The whole Moose Club down in California. I remember watching it had to be mid-'80s. And one particular weekend, I should have written it down, 10 companies in the States, high-tech companies, were going public. 9 of them were led by Canadians. Great, but come on. So I hope that answers the question, because I'm probably a little bit off topic here, but yeah, the faster we get this up and rolling, the faster we keep what we have, the people, the wealth creation, and our future. And we build our future here. And we build the future for our kids. We got to stop talking about it, actually start doing it.
Seattle has nicer weather than Kitchener.
Seattle has nicer weather than Kitchener? No, that's why Microsoft software technically is buggy. Because it's so depressing to go to work every day in rain. But I want that struck from the record.
I remember hearing somebody, Ross Video, who's here in Ottawa.
Yep.
And he was at a mayor's breakfast, and he was expressing his concern. He says, listen, most companies get to a certain size and they look to peel out. In other words, sell to private equity. And we've already seen what happens with that. Look at the Hudson's Bay, right? All of a sudden, it's gutted. They sold the land. They took everything they had. They basically strip mined it, right? And they just left a carcass behind, which was not viable.
The hangars, that's all that's left.
But Ross Video was saying, listen, if you have a unicorn, he had offers to purchase his company. He stuck with it. What advice would you give to a tech startup? Then, listen, you're wrapping up, right? In this equity piece. And I'm probably a little bit outside of where our scope of our conversation here.
No, that's okay.
But what would you advise a tech startup? Instead of bailing out to the first person with, it's like the first date, the best one with lipstick on, that's the ticket. And it's not.
Yeah, I think, so I've lived this for 40 years in Ottawa with a lot of tech startups. And I don't think they consciously think, okay, let me get out, let me sell to an American. What happens is after 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, you've gotten to the $6 million growth phase. And you want to grow, but you need cash to grow. The banks are not going to give it to you. The Canadian VCs, you're too big because they can't make enough. By the time you get to 6 million, you probably have 80 people. You've been around for 5 years. You've probably gone through 2 or 3 dilutions. So the Americans, they'll give you money, but there's a lot of strings. And usually that means they're going to take you out because that's the only way they can make money. So the Canadians, I'm answering the questions here. The Canadians do it to themselves because they have no choice. Okay, if you're going to grow, you have to grow somehow. In Ottawa, you get to $6 million, you sell out, and the city will carry you around on their shoulders and show everybody what a hero you are. $6 million is Starbucks money in New York or Chicago or LA. What I would tell a CEO is go talk to your accountant or your finance person and have them go and have a conversation with a Paul Labarge or a Patrick Westaway, who did a great article on this about 7 or 8 years ago. It's on the website about what's possible. So don't dilute yourself month 1, year 1, year 2. Maybe you've got to do your friends and family round, raise a couple $100,000 that way. But there may well be by that time, hopefully there will be, flow-through shares as a possibility. It never existed before. Now you can actually fund, you'll be able to fund your company without going to extremes. Maybe you do a couple $1 million in flow-through shares and your company hits 10 million. And then maybe you bring in some VC money from outside the country. But then you're much larger. you haven't diluted yourself and you get better terms. Because let's be honest, VCs and angels are in the business not because they want to be Mary Poppins. They're in the business to make money, as they should be. So if that's the game, then you got to learn to play the game a little bit smarter. And this FTS is going to really change the game. It is a game changer. We talk about you're going to ask this question eventually, but we talk about the 500 million that we think may get pumped in the first year. And you asked me the question, what difference could that possibly make to tech companies, specifically startups? Imagine if 500 of them, for math's sake, each got $1 million. Pardon my language. Holy crap. Startups now typically start with $50,000 to $100,000. And it's not the money so much as the time, because what happens with a startup is you'll have a brilliant engineer or someone who's got a brilliant idea. They start it. And no sooner have they started it and it's starting to grow, they're going to go out and get money. So instead of funneling that brilliance into the product, they funnel it into begging for cash. We can skip that whole step here to a certain extent. Give them the money, let them focus on the product. Oh, man. And we talked about Nortel before. I've lived in Ottawa now. Yeah, I live on the Quebec side, but I've lived in Ottawa now for 40 years. I lived through the Nortel downturn. And what was most interesting about it is you can take Nortel off the table, could not get these people to move. There's two things about Ottawa. Getting people here to recruiting them in is really hard, okay? Because we're a pit bull on a gnat's ass until Bruce Firestone did the Senators. Now everybody knows where Ottawa is. Before that, seriously, global traveler here, never heard of it. Montreal, oh, they heard of Montreal. Okay, now you have the opportunity. Nortel, you couldn't get these people to leave. You can't get them in the city. You can't get them here. When you get them here, they won't leave. They will not leave. It's incredible. You guys know this. Whether it's Ottawa or Kingston, this whole little valley, incredible way of life, right? All you got to do is get somebody in here for a day and they'll go back and talk their spouse into it, right? That's how it works. So getting people to leave after the crash, no. These are engineers. And what's next? Despite everything that got heaped on them and despite getting hosed, I got to change that word, hosed financially by Nortel when they went south, they stayed here and they started new companies. Imagine having that kind of resilience, right? In a group and then giving them access to capital. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm heading to end of life and I'm so excited because this is not about that, but because this can actually happen. And I've whined about the Avro Arrow since I was a kid. They'll finally be able to shut me up. And they should do it because the government, as I said, hasn't been great at picking the winners. They picked wrong when they picked the automotive industry. No offense to any of my friends in Hamilton. Give me a break. $13 billion for automotive and nothing for Nortel? What were you thinking? They weren't thinking. Same thing with BlackBerry. BlackBerry got taken out by Apple and a bunch of other things. But there's a lot of things the government could have done. On top of this FTS, the next thing we're going to work heavily on is getting the Canadian government and Canadians, but Canadian government in particular, to buy Canadian. It's a great concept. Why don't we do it for software? Why don't we do it for telecommunications? Mitel, Newbridge, brilliant technology. Terry ran that by himself. He didn't get any. No one gave him any favors. Unbelievable. And while Terry Matthews is doing this, he starts 100+ other companies. The man is a one-man machine when it comes to grinding out these startups. And that's what we need more of.
One thing that I'm a little confused by is you're in the planting employees business corporately, but your passion is all tech. Why are you an angel?
That's a very personal answer to that question. I could have, and I still could be, but our fourth daughter was born with holes in her heart. Ooh. And went into heart arrest 3 times in the first 4 months. before Chio did the operation that did. She's 27 now, by the way, and in great shape. Great news. We have, so my wife and I have run this firm, done it globally, and put all of our money into the assets that we have. Paid off the house in the middle of 2003 or 2004. And we put all our money into that kind of stuff because we honestly figured we were going to need the money eventually to get her a new heart. It wasn't going to happen in Canada. We were going to have to go somewhere else. So that's where that's why I don't travel as much as I used to. After we had the fourth child, I literally stopped traveling for more. I wouldn't be away for more than a day. And I'm always within one flight home, but that's the answer. That's why I'm not a VC. But I do a lot of work with VCs and CEOs in the background, just telling them or suggesting ways that they could package themselves or present them, or who they could present themselves to, and opening some doors. And that's the extent of it. And that'll be the extent of me, period.
If we don't, as Canadians, respond to this, it sounds like we're leaving money on the table, regardless of the political party that's in play, right? We as Canadians. So what can we do to say, hey, here's an option, or even your startup, right? Going, hey, I'm looking for money. And instead of, there's the BDC, which is an arm of, or it's government run. How else can we say, listen, I need some of that. That's a great plan. Thank you very much for using it in the mining and in oil industry. That no pushback on that. But you know what? We can use that love here. So what can we do as whoever's listening to this? Let's say, listen.
So the answer to the question is thank you for asking it, is quite simple. Go to CanFlowThrough. So CanFlowThrough.com. Man, I should have picked another, but we tried. I had literally 48 hours to get this kicked. And leave a few words of support. On the back end of the website, it says, here's a bunch of questions, answer these questions, and then say something. Send us a message. There's 1.8 million people in tech. The reason tech isn't taken better care of is because we don't speak as a voice. The government has done, and here's where I'm going to get in trouble. The government has done a brilliant job the last 10, 12 years of making certain that Canadian IT people, Canadian tech workers had no voice. None. The National Association got wiped out when John passed away. There is no National Association. And what the government has done, and what they started to do before John passed away 6 years ago, is they started to say, okay, we're going to give you, whatever your name is, we're going to give you Invest Ottawa, X number of dollars, Communitech, X number of dollars, Mars, X number of dollars, all across the country. Okay. Here's where I get in trouble again. It's not in their best interest, if they want to continue to get funded by the government, to say, hey, wait a minute, we should be doing this. So getting those people together under one roof to make a decision has been impossible. It's not like I haven't tried, not like others haven't tried, but it's been impossible. So the average Canadian technology worker or knowledge worker needs to go to CanFlowThrough.com and drop a message. Record a video. I recorded a video and put it up. I've had a lot of people look at it and laugh, and it's fine. You don't have to record a video. Just leave us a couple of words of encouragement so the government goes, oh, there's a voting block over. This is the whole issue. There's a voting block of 1.8 million people that we could tap into. Selfish? Yes, but that's the way it works. If we're going to ask the government to endorse this and get out of our way, that's what we need to do. We need to understand how the system works and work within those parameters, knowing full well that it's in everybody's best interest. When I started talking about flow-through shares to the MPs that I talked to, none of them had ever heard about it. What's interesting is I had sent out, by that time, about 50 FedEx packages to these MPs. Never made it to their desk. When I discovered this, a couple $1,000s later, I said, okay, so it's now knock on the door, have the conversation, press the flesh. And that's what we needed to do to get this done.
Two quick questions, and this helps define it further. What do you mean by tech? Right? Like yeah, computer programming. I get that. I'm making a piece of space hardware. I get that. What are the boundaries of tech? And then are there any other industries that could use this same concept that are not covered right now?
So that's two big questions. So tech is, in my mind, anything that involves knowledge workers. So if you're manipulating data, so what is it? It's AI, it's clean tech, it's software, it's hardware. Anything that involves creating something from literally nothing or advancing something. Computer aided design for furniture. Is it tech? Yeah. The computer aided design part is. So is the software that you develop to make the furniture, all that kind of stuff. So that's all, for me, that's all tech. And I believe that ultimately Canada will move towards a program that will reward people who invest in companies and create jobs, because that's what it's all about. If you invest, you create a job, you should be able to write that expense off. We're talking, let's get FTS for tech done first, and then we can look at these other things. And I think that the government is probably concerned about that because they're only looking at what's the tax revenue loss, not what they get in the end, which is why we came at it from the back end. Here's what you get, guys. Worth it? Yeah. Okay, good. So that's where I think this is headed. May take us 3 to 5 years.
David, two quick questions.
Yes, sir.
One, if this resonates with a listener, how they get a hold of you, and who are you designing this message to reach?
Great questions, both of them. If someone wants more information and they really want to talk, my email address is actually on the CanFlow through website because my son put it up a couple days ago. So it works. If they're having trouble there, they can get me at dperry@perrymartel.com. That's my company.
If you have one sentence where I want you to listen to this message, who's the guy that should be listening?
Right now, it needs to be the politicians.
Okay.
Because the politicians are going to make the decision and they're going to then deal with the policymakers. But the politicians need to believe it's time to let Canada lead. It's time. It's really time. Let Canada lead. And doing this, let my people be free. Literally, this will set the country up for success for a long time to come. I've had dozens of conversations around this, and I can see no downside to and I'm very pragmatic. I can see no downside to doing this. None whatsoever.
And Perry, I want to say thank you so much for an extremely enlightening conversation, banter. My co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. Listen, if you're in the tech sector, you're in Canada, this is a show for you. And listen, if you're outside of Canada, this might be a show for your country too. It might be in play there also. So I want to say thank you.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by their website creativeinsight.com, spelled KIINH.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIV, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner. And Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.